Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. I still have a cough and a bit of a cold, but I will be able to get through the show okay because I took some medication. So, one of the things that I'm very interested in is this long-term recording of history. How will we be talking about the events of World War II, not just now, but in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years' time? There's all sorts of things happening because the veterans generation is dying off. The door is nearly closed. There's lots of projects going on to try and memorialize and honor and record these things. And this is one of such projects. But today's project comes with a pretty extraordinary organization behind it, the University of Oxford, which you can't really get a more world-renowned organization behind this. And joining me tonight is Dr. Stuart Lee from the university. Tell us all about it. So good evening, Stuart. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you, Paul? Apart from the cough.
Apart from the cough, I'm all right. So, we were talking before going on live there that there have been all sorts of projects over the years to try and preserve items, artifacts, stories, histories. Some have disappeared by the wayside. Some sort of still exist, but they're a bit clunky. But before we talk about this project, their finest hour, and what it is, let us have a little bit more insight into how you yourself came involved in it. You come from a First World War study background and from an English literature, but how did you become the project lead on this?
Yeah, that's right, Paul. So my background was I taught and researched First World War poetry. I'm actually a literary executive of the Wilfred Owen Estate, so I've been sort of teaching that for about 30 years. And quite early on in the early 90s, I started to work on digital projects. I mean, these were really going pre-web almost. And I'll talk about sort of like the background projects to that, but we worked on a lot of crowdsourcing projects, as they're called, to do with the First World War. And I'll take you through those in a second, but then really what was coming up constantly was, why don't you do the Second World War? And, we wanted to exhaust up to the centenary of the First World War, that avenue. And now we're picking up World War II.
Brilliant. Well, you've come on with a PowerPoint that you're going to guide us through, and folks, we'll do questions as we go along. And obviously, from my point of view as a host of a channel, it's all about not the creation, just as the creation of an archive, but it's the accessibility, the ability to search it, the ability to use it. How will people be able to use this work in the future? And also, one of the things I really want to get to grips with is this understanding that over the course of the 8 decades or so since the end of the Second World War, families have often an idea of what granddad did or grandma did or what was their own family's involvement in it, that maybe over the years a little bit of exaggerations get involved or a bit of miscommunication. That idea of that in itself being interesting, studying how the war is remembered today compared to how it is remembered in the past. So I'll hand it over to you to guide us through these slides, but I will jump into the comments, and folks, I will expect lots of good questions from you too. So tell us all about it, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. Yeah, so I thought what I'd do is just take people through the model, which is quite an interesting model of how we're going to do this. But as you can see, it's called Their Finest Hour. And the objective is really to collect contributions from members of the public related to their family's experience or anything they own or have had passed down to them about the Second World War. You'll see the logo there, Oxford University, English faculty, etc., but also Heritage. So the Heritage Lottery Fund in the United Kingdom, that's what's backing this. It's a 2-year project. And we're in the collection stage at the moment and training. I'll talk about that. And then the launch will be, as you could imagine, June the 6th, 2024. It's a great day to sort of pick 80 years after it. And that's when the archive will go live. So I started by answering Paul's questions about my background in First World War. And I did a lot of digital projects and so on. But in 2006, 2008, crowdsourcing, this idea where it's called user-generated content, where people can actually contribute material they have. We started to play about with that, and we ran something called the Great War Archive, and we did this online site. People could upload things they had about the First World War. And then, and we just came up with this idea. For those of you who know the United Kingdom and our TV, you might have come across a show called Antiques Roadshow, where people bring things along and the expert goes, oh yeah, I know what that is. Well, we came up with this idea, well, why don't we get people to bring things along to us and we'll take pictures of them. We'll digitize them there and then, and we'll ask them a few questions about it. So we played around with that. we got about 4,000 items in about, it was actually only 6 months we ran that. It then went across Europe, Europeana 1914, 1918, across about 20 countries, collected about 500,000 items from across Europe. This is all First World War, so apologies to everyone there. That was with big Staatsbibliotheks, big museums, big libraries across Europe. As I said, you know, went into Germany with that, which I've got all kinds of stories, and the Republic of Ireland, fascinating stuff. And then we brought it back for the centenary, and we turned the model around, and we said, we don't just want to work with big museums and archives. We want to train, you know, village halls, community centres, A-level students, so secondary school students, to run their own little event in their community, and anything they photograph comes into our archive. So that was the background to it, and that's when this Second World War idea came up. Before I'll talk about what this is in a second, just to say, the pandemic hit us. We ran one with NAM, the National Army Museum, in December 2019. We were all ready to go, and then the pandemic hit. So this has been delayed a bit, but we've got 2 years funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund. And I was just going to talk about the model of how we run a collection day, because this is quite interesting, and it might be interesting to people.
Just before you do, Stuart, just nip at something in the bud. Rick, we have viewers from all over the world. There are people currently watching from all sorts of different time zones. And Rick Green is asking, calling it their finest hour seems it might potentially skew this to the British Commonwealth experience. No question mark. But of course, obviously, we're talking about the funding coming primarily from the UK. But of course, with it being digital, people can theoretically submit from anywhere in the world. And also, I'm sure there are people within the UK who come from all different areas, whose families may have been in wherever it may have been in World War II, Indonesia, Lithuania, whatever, who can submit outside. But it is, you're based in the UK, but in terms of the scope is, I mean, are you calling it global?
Yes, but it's a very good question, Rick, because so the lottery fund only will fund activities, so these are collection days, as we call them, to run within the UK. So that's Northern Ireland and mainland Britain as well. And the primary focus was Britain and the Commonwealth troops, or sorry, not the troops, but the experience of the Britain and Commonwealth. However, that immediately from day one threw up questions, because we were getting sort of people from the States saying, well, my grandfather was there, he was a GI, he was based in England before he went into Europe, etc. And we started to go, well, that's part of not only your family story, but it's part of Britain's experience of the Second World War. So we're very open to taking contributions from anywhere. That said, we're also linking up with countries who are thinking of doing something like this. And that happened in the First World War as well. We just went, anyone would do it. But we started to link up with other countries and say, well, this is how we've done it. If you want to sort of copy the model, please do. You know, we'll give you any help and advice we can. So I don't know if that answers your question, Rick.
Brilliant response. I think that's exactly what we're looking for. So back to you to talk about the formula.
Yeah, so there is, I'll show you this. There is an online form, so anyone in the world can upload stuff and submit. But the focus in the UK is we train people how to run a collection day. And as I said, these really are, they can be 1 hour, 2 hour, 5 hour. They run over a week in a village hall, a national library or museum or whatever, or a faith centre. And the way we talk about this, there's 4 stages in these things. The first is we welcome people. We would introduce them. They come to a desk. We'll give them the necessary forms, which I know we want to come on to, because it's all where the rights are cleared and everything. Yeah. Then we do a short interview them. We ask them what they brought in. We talk to them. We ask them why they've brought it in. And we're starting to dig into a few more questions there. And a lot of the time, they're bringing in a plastic bag full of objects they've just found in their house, found in their loft, etc. And so we go through it with them. But then there and then, we will photograph it, and that's absolutely key. I think there's an overview of a sort of like classic example of a collection day. So if it gives you a visual view, it really is a room. And then we've done these in massive libraries, but we did them in sort of small village halls or A-level sort of centres in schools and so on. So any scale, these can be done. So it goes round, welcome people, interview them, write it all down. We now audio record them in the interview stage, shortish interviews, digitize, give them back the objects or anything they brought in, and off they trot. So there's just some pictures. Now, these aren't from this current project. These are from the ones we did in the Second World War, but you can see the sort of scale there, and even the top right-hand one there. I mean, you know, this is about generational gaps. So actually what you're seeing there are the school children interviewing the gentleman who brought in objects, in this case, to do with the 1418 conflict. So we train those children how to do some basic interviewing. Now, it's quite rare we do it in schools. Most of the time we train people, you know, who are older. So as we run training courses online from anyone in the world that can attend. We do them in person, how to run these events from pre-prep all the way through the event and after it. And that was me on Friday. I'm going to talk about a few items. So we did one down in the county library in the city of Oxford. That was me doing digitization. You can see camera point down. We've worked through these processes hundreds of times, but basically we use that type of system because mainly what you get are documents, and you want to just quickly digitize through diaries, letters, etc., photographs, and that allows you to do it very quickly. There is an upload. Now, I don't know if you can see that. I appreciate it, but people can go online and just upload their story, and that's been open since Christmas. We've got about 40, but we haven't really pushed it, but we've had about 40 contributions there. And we've only done 2 collection days, but we've already got about 2,000 to 3,000 photos. So in each photo might be a page of a diary, it might be a page of a letter, a photograph, and so on. So there's 2 routes to this. It's really, really quite interesting, and also post-COVID, how people are engaging with this. And we've trained about 150 people on how to run collection days all around the UK. So our target was 35 collection days, but we think we'll break that and some. And they will be popping up all over the UK. We've got it on our website where they're appearing and so on. So yeah, as you can see there, you can do direct uploads, and that's the URL of the website. So I just thought just before we finish, so we can have questions. This was just Friday, so we ran a collection day in the Oxford County Library, and I was on the camera. First item that came in was this gentleman gave it to me, brought it in with some supplementary documentation. A tie there owned by Chiang Kai-shek. So, you know, first thing you're touching, it's odd, you're touching history. So you take photographs of it, but it gives you an idea of the sort of oddity of the items that came in. Now that's obviously, and it's not going to give us any information about Chiang Kai-shek, but it's a historical item of some import. Right at the end of the day, youngish gentleman came in with his collection, all to do with a relative. I haven't got the details, I'm afraid, because I haven't processed them yet. But as you can see, he was a bigot. So we got the map there. There were photographs all scrolled up. Had to unroll them, hold them down, weight them, letters, documents, etc., supporting this. I think my colleague tweeted this and asked everyone, "What's this?" And everyone wrote back and said it's a map.
I have that same copy of that map in my archive, because that's obviously Sword Beach, and normally my great uncle landed on the kind of bottom right middle of that map there. So in my case, I was immediately drawn. I said, why hasn't it got pencil markings on it? Because the one I have has pencil markings, my great uncle, but of course that's unique to my great uncle, which brings up a question I'm sure we'll bring up later on is the ability when you have a photo of something like this or a diary is for someone taking the photo to recognize what might be really historically significant about that the owner hasn't got, because none of us know everything, and the variety of things is going to be brought in. But to the right person, it might just reveal that little nugget of information. So we'll talk about the indexing and accessibility and all that later on. But we just had a question from Dan from the Bomber Command archive about what file format you're using for the digital photos.
So in terms of uploads, we're quite agnostic. We can cope with those and we can reformat them. In terms of the photography, Dan, we tend to go with JPEG on this. If we were doing it properly, if I was in Bodleian Reaper Graphics, we'd be taking TIFF.
TIFFs.
I
Yeah.
think we still would go with TIFF, but these will be photographed at JPEG. Now we keep master copies, so they're photographed at a high res, but then the ones that go on the web are lower res, obviously for web distribution. But we always make sure that you can read the most significant object on it. So in this case, the map, we would want to zoom in and make sure that you could read the smallest cartographic symbol on there.
Cool.
But we also take audio and video as well. But we will format them, and we will talk about preservation in maybe a bit later on. But we can reformat them for availability, because you do get them in all formats. So yeah, in terms of the question, so on the collection day, we advise people, but this is not always to have a couple of Second World War historians there. In the First World War, we would have that. We had the Commonwealth War Grave, so we had an archive of people. So when things came in, we could quickly sieve through them and go, actually, this is quite important. We should be looking. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Good man. And yeah, so we do. And also, sometimes people just bring in so much. And what you've got to then do, because you are to a degree limited in a collection day, is focus in on, well, what are the key events here?
Yep.
You know, if I get 200 postcards, which of these are important, and so on. And so I thought I'd show that one. And I haven't looked through all the items for that, but there are others. There's other stuff supplementing that as well. So we get physical objects as a sextant from a Royal Naval Signaller. This came in with a typewriter as well, so they kept that. As well as his training manuals, personal accounts on the various ships he'd been on. This was quite interesting because the lady brought this in. It was actually stacks of stuff, and we photographed it all. A single serviceman, RASC, in France, captured Stalag 18, I think. Someone will probably correct me on that. It's in Austria. And she'd catalogued it under the various stages of the war. So France, capture, coming home, and in order. And I was just photographing these, but what was really interesting about that were the photographs bottom right in the POW camp, and they all seemed to be having a jolly good time, and they seemed to be doing mass. I mean, these are really big events they were running, which were extraordinary. But I love, there was a collection of playbills, as you can see, and programs from shows they'd put on, and you can imagine you start digging into these and you're getting all kinds of quips that maybe the guards and prison guards hadn't quite picked up on. So there's a lot of humor, but that was a vast collection. And then I just wanted to put this in just at the end, because there's a couple of scrapbooks brought in, and this is why one of the things we're going to talk about, I expect, is that we're not just interested in combatants by any stretch of imagination. We're trying to capture the experiences of everyone, children, you know, non-combatants, women, home front, as well as combatants as well. But this was a scrapbook where the father who was serving was sending things back from India and Burma, but in a jokey way to his young boy, to try and reassure him that what he was going through wasn't hellish. So you could see cartoons of Mickey Mouse there and drawings of elephants. And there's lots of stuff in there, poems he's written for his son, just to try and reassure him that it's all okay. So we never know what we're going to get in, but that was just a few things from Friday. And that's the website. So I will finish sharing and see what we've had.
Well, it was a great start, and questions are flooding in, which is great. So I'll just take them in no particular order. Okay. So Kevin Jones is asking, will there be any events in North Wales?
Well, Kevin, that's a good, interesting question, because of all the ones we've got at the moment, Wales we haven't managed to get any in Wales. We're looking in the northwest of England. I know that doesn't help you, but so we are looking for people who might be interested in running things in particularly in Wales. We've got a few in Northern Ireland, quite a few in Scotland, dispersed across England. But at the moment, Wales, we haven't got any. We had approached the National Library and so on, but it didn't work. So community events would be really good. We're willing to train you and help you.
Okay, brilliant. So Richard O'Sullivan is asking, do you find that most of the collections brought in are related to the home front rather than the overseas military experiences?
Well, that's a good question, Richard. I should say we've only run 2 events now. We've got about 10 more in the pipeline, and there'll be more and more coming through the year. If I can make a comparison, because I attended dozens of the First World War ones, people were bringing things in from the First World War which I think were primarily about combatants, and there were not many items. Now, my initial observation of what I saw on Friday and what we've seen at a couple of the other ones were, first of all, it's a mixture. We are getting stuff from the home front, from the children's perspective, from the women's perspective, from, the land army, the munitions factory. But also, there's a lot more of it. I was just blown away by the amount of material people had on an individual. I'd never seen anything like that from the First World War. And there's obvious, you can just say, well, just the 20 years gap, things just get destroyed, get lost, or whatever. But it was very rare in the First World War. We had a meaty collection, but pretty much everything that came in on Friday was.
Brilliant. This is a great one from Gary August here, and it brings up a question I was going to ask myself, but he's put it in a different way, in that the most famous example I can think of the public being asked for photos is, of course, the World War II photos of the coastlines of France and Europe that they sent in by their tens of thousands that the Allies used to then provide the information for D-Day and et cetera, et cetera. None of which they returned, which they're all in wherever boxes they're in wherever they are in Whitehall or something. So Gary's asked about the confidence, because we can think between us of these various other schemes over the years, people saying, bring in your staff, send us your things, some of which have been brilliant, some of which have been less above board, so to speak. So how are you going about kind of instilling in people the confidence that you're dealing with this project properly, and that the things are going to be verified and identified properly? I mean, obviously you're giving the stuff back, although people are asking, we'll bring up the getting involved with museums, but answer the question, if you wouldn't mind, about this kind of confidence issue, about trusting people trusting their archives and their memories with the project.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Gary, and I think it's on several levels. So just to pick up on one point, we never retain any of the physical objects. What we do is we point them in the direction of a regimental museum, the Imperial War Museum, a library, or whatever, and say, please contact them. And particularly if we know it's a particularly rare item. However, what we're dealing with is, if people bring something in and say, well, I believe it's this, or my grandfather or my grandmother did this, how do we verify that? Well, to a certain degree, we don't challenge them. We might have a discussion with them, and we will record what they believe has happened. Now, we will then QA that as a post-edit process and go in, and we may insert editorial comments. But we are certainly recognizing the fact that what we are capturing as much as anything is the perception and the story that was handed down. Now, the objects themselves, I'm sure you, Paul, or a lot of people watching, when they see it, will be able to have a look at it and verify it, or at least, see what's in the item there, or look for the verification they would need. And if it's not there, then they would say, okay, we have to treat this with a pinch of salt. Excuse me. We are, as I said, we bring in World War II historians. We'll be doing a lot of QAing throughout this year and into next year, and looking at the material. But I think the important thing, we're also trying to capture the stories and the mistruths or the perceptions of this war. Because, I mean, I know I've spoken to my mother. She's told me about her war experience as a child. I know that can't be true in certain areas, but the fact that she has picked that up and that has sunk into her head, and she actually firmly believes it, I wouldn't want to call her anything, is important. And I think that is interesting. I come from literature, language, narrative, story, so I'm as interested in that as, that's specifically that regiment at this place, etc. I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, Gary. I think it does. And I find that really interesting, because you're looking at your website goes. I encourage all the links in the description below, folks. You can find all the links to the social media and the main website. Is when historians will be looking at your archive in 30 years' time, it'll be interesting. Let's say you have 5,000 oral histories from people who came in and talked about their parents or their grandparents. maybe the percentage of stories you get of people who are saying they were commandos, airborne, Bletchley Park code breakers will be extraordinarily high, higher than could possibly have been, given that lots of people in the war were doing something more mundane but no less important, stoking engines on a ship, whatever. But that information you're recording is just as interesting for historians, because it reveals where in 2023 to 2025 where people's understanding of what their family did, understanding of what was important for their family in the war is as much. I mean, we can already go to the archives and get war diaries. We don't need the war diaries again. What we need is more information that historians can pull from. So I think this idea of you have of it revealing what the country thinks about itself, I find that really fascinating. So if you want to elaborate a little bit more about that kind of aspect of it, in the how do you think this archive will be useful, and who will it be useful to?
Yeah, well, I think that very good questions, Paul, and points. So I think first thing to say is it's really interesting when people come in, they try to tell you the stuff they think you'd be interested in. And we've had a few examples of this in the NAM and the couple of collection days we've done already. And they tell us all this stuff about, for example, the prisoner of war camp. And they say, well, what about your grandmother? Well, she didn't do anything in the war. Well, what did she do? Well, she looked after the home. She had to do the rationing. But that's important. So we're trying to sort of tease out that and say it's not just the heroes and so on, or whatever the exciting stories that everyone's interested in. The other thing is, after we've done the interview, if we identify them as someone we would like to do a 2-hour, 3-hour interview, we'll follow that up. But we ask them all some interesting questions, like what are the 3 or 4 top words or terms that spring to your mind when you think about the war or the war generation? If you choose an object, what does it make you think about? And then we also round up with a question about the appropriation of the war in popular discourse. For those of you who aren't in the UK, you may be familiar, you may have heard of this, but the war, the Blitz, Dunkirk, etc., are constantly referenced in nearly any national discussion we have at the moment.
Yep.
And we're trying to tease out what people make of that, particularly if they knew someone from the war generation or were the war generation themselves. So we're trying to capture a lot of angles on that. We take demographic information as well. So in 50 years' time, people look back on this archive will go, it's interesting what all 50, 60-year-old women were saying, as opposed to 20-year-old males or that sort of thing. So, lots of information we're trying to collect.
I mean, I find that just incredibly fascinating because, I mean, when I was in my collecting days back in my teens, you see in Britain, everybody kept the big, huge babies' gas masks, but didn't keep the small ones. And is it because they just got thrown in the shed or something? But it's interesting that the confirmation bias might tell us that the things that family records aren't necessarily representative of what was important. It's people kept things they thought, oh, maybe it's because it's easy. See, the amount of 1950s ration books that get brought into things is amazing. The wartime ones don't exist, but the 50s ones do. That tells you something as well. And I'm interested in that aspect. So to confirm what Great Dominion is saying now, I'm assuming, well, you've confirmed this, you're going to be taking all the phone numbers, the email address and people, so you can follow up and you can say, okay, this has led to something. We'd like to, now bring you back to elaborate on this because we find this thread really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Great Dominion. So we do take that, but obviously we're very conscious of data privacy. So that isn't made available. And so we can follow up on that. We've also found been doing the First World War for 10, 15 years, you'll get media contact saying, would it be possible to be put in touch with that person? So we do a bit of matchmaking. Academics want to say, that's a great item. Where did you get that? Can I speak to the person? And occasionally, a couple of times, I just got one this week, family members. That's my long lost branch of a family. Can you put me in touch with it? So that does happen as well. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Tony Vart is asking, how does this link into local museum collections that already exist? And a follow-up one to that, Richard is asking again, good question. There must be complementary relationships with a variety of military and civic museums. And also someone said, and I'll find it in a minute, maybe some of these museums might see you being in competition with them because, museums want archives as well. So how are you kind of connecting up with these other organizations that are doing their own work, perhaps with less funding or in a particular niche area that you how what relationships are you forging?
So, well, so we have a steering group. There's a representative on the steering group from the Royal Navy, the RAF, and National Army Museum, and the Imperial War to the IWM. We had support, so we've got links with people like the Gurkha Museum, other associations like the Burma Star Association as well. So it is true. I mean, in Britain, obviously small museums are absolutely financially strapped.
Yeah.
They just are, a breaking point. I think they don't see us as competition, but they see us as a way of helping. So we can provide them with a bit of resource. We can help them run this. And what they're doing with the ones we've interacted with, they're saying this would actually be quite good to help us. They've usually got something lined up probably for 2024, 2025, 80th anniversaries, and thinking about, we're going to want to do some new exhibitions. Well, this might bring some new stuff into us. If we have a collection day in the local museum, we might increase the footfall as well. So I think generally people see it as supportive, but I think it would be safe to say, the big museums like the IWM, they have their way of doing things, etc. And whilst they might be supportive in terms of the principle, they might be doing something else which we don't want to muddy the waters.
Okay.
But everything we collect, which we haven't got onto yet, is freely available to everyone for reuse. So as we've said to IWM and the other museums, you can have this collection. We can migrate it to your service. If you want a copy of it, you can have it. So, it might be something that could supplement their collections.
Well, I definitely want to follow up this idea about the availability. But before we do that, another couple of questions, then we'll bring it back to you. So Mary is asking about what are the options for collecting oral histories from people who may be less able to travel?
Yeah, great question, Mary, because when we started to write this bid, COVID hadn't happened. Since COVID, everything's done remotely. So what we did it in the past in the First World War one, but it wasn't required so much. But we did interview. We would go, or we could interview online or via a phone. So we have done that certainly with people in care homes. So it can be done. You could do your own recording and upload. We can do remote interviews, particularly if it's someone with a key story, elderly, infirm, disabled, etc. So that's all available. If people contact us and say, look, we've got a great story we'd love to tell you about, we can arrange that.
Brilliant. And Dan is following up about the, after your collection days, the real work begins. And Dan, Bomber Command, the amount of digital archives and audio recordings he's created and amassed himself is incredible. So what's the plan for, obviously this is an ongoing, it's not going to be sorted out in the next fortnight. This is years of work ahead of you. So what's the work after you've finished collecting things, after you've had all your open days, after you've kind of closed off the online donation portal, so to speak? What's the next step?
Yeah, well, I actually read Dan's question as the real work begins after the collection day, and just so immediately to say that's absolutely true, because what you've then got to do is upload and catalog everything.
Yeah, and
that's often a bit of a strain, but we can provide support and help for people like that. And we've made the cataloging. I won't get technical. It's fairly easy to do the entry, what we call the metadata, all adheres to sort of standard. So hopefully it's not too arduous. But in your turn, Paul, so what we do, we're going to be closing it down about April next year. But our key thing then really, and we'll be doing this all the way through apart from QAing, is making sure it migrates to proper preservation systems and the university's online repository, which makes these types of collections freely available to anyone in the world. So that's our key objective for when the money runs out. But we are seeking funding now to take this in all kinds of areas. When we collect this material, we've got a great research archive, and we would love to be able to get some postdocs in or doctoral students or whatever and say, fill your boots, look at this, start doing some sort of analysis of it, maybe analyze what we got in here with the First World War, those sorts of things. So we're looking for follow-up research projects, but it will be all available to anyone, so anyone can start.
Well, I want to follow up on that, but you made me sort of laugh inside there when you said how adding the meter information is fairly simple. But I mean, and I'm going to say it should be, but again, going back in time, looking at some of these previous projects, they amass these interviews, they amass the information, they amass photos, but then you just can't find out what you want unless you just scroll through thousands and thousands of things in a kind of random way. I mean, there are some brilliantly organized online archives. The Australian War Memorial over there has an amazing ability to search all the photos. Other systems online are clunky, difficult. You can't find what you want, or you find it accidentally, or someone else's. So if there's from my point, there's no point having this unless it's idiot proof in terms of accessibility. And as you said there, it's able to use. I would hope if in 10 years time, if I want to look at what were people thinking about land army work in World War II in 2023 when people were being interviewed, that I can just go there and find it, and then I can also use that information. So again, just kind of, I know you've said it, but kind of reiterate the policy of this being a kind of an open access archive for everybody to use long term.
Yeah. So what we're picking up that last point, and I'll come back to the first point. Yeah. So it's freely available, Creative Commons, free for reuse, even for commercial purposes. So that means that obviously people can do things with it, but that allows you, if you're writing a book or you're writing something like that, you can start using this material and start including it. You just have to cite it, that's all. The balance with the metadata or cataloging is really that obviously we're training volunteers to run this in small halls, in rural communities, and we're asking them to catalog. They're not professional catalogers. So we have to balance it by keeping the metadata fields simple, but also that someone like you or I could go in and get something meaningful from it. Now, of course, it doesn't have to stop there. What we can start doing when we get the material in is adding keywords, maybe using sort of like some of the keywords from the War Museum, keeping with their sort of categorization. We can go in, we can start adding more data, we can add more fields. So as long as we get the basics and we get all the paperwork which is sent to us for us to collect, we can, another avenue which might be is enhancing the metadata, so making it more. So the first stab may not be perfect, but it's there, and we can add to it.
Thank you. I like that response because I'm thinking about that photo you showed of the school age people being involved in the process there, because I'm sure some of my museum curator friends who are my age and older, they possibly need a little bit of help with the technological side of things, because the industry has changed so much in the last 2 or 3 decades in terms of scanning and OCR recognition, all that kind of stuff there. And it seems to me that if, as the veterans generation dies out, which it clearly is going to, what we need is people who are coming in younger, for whom this is all easy, for whom they know instinctively how to scan and archive and do, because that's their world. And to have this as a long-term viable project, we need new blood in it who do that stuff easily. So how important it is for you to bring in younger people to understand the methodology, so they can then the framework could be used to study other things in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the next collection day is in a school in Wigan, so they're running that, so that will be the teachers and the students running it as well. But yeah, you're quite right. These sorts of skills, they're growing up with them. What they're not growing up with is the knowledge. So we could have shown them that map and they might have just typed in map. But obviously where we need is the subject expertise to say that was, well, not a fake map, but, an undocumented, a bigot map, but without showing the details of the beaches of Norway.
And I assume again that you're going to be welcoming long-term people coming in with giving you ideas of how they might want to use the archive, in that if there's someone studying, for example, the historiography aspect that we talked about earlier and what the trends were, is that say, to you, Stuart, and the project, would it be possible for you to look at, how was the information, what was the demographic of people interested in World War II in 2023, and how did that change by 2033, or whatever it would be, or was there more interest in anniversary years, or was there? I mean, even the fact that we've had the new head of state, we've got King Charles now. That's, I'm sure, has created a bit of interest in the past and history and lineage and things like that, and that might be a little boost for people's interest in the old era, because there was all that footage we had of the late Queen when she was young, of that those kind of events. Because to me, again, we have the war diaries, we have that kind of information, we have service records. What we don't have is the gap, the things that fill in the gaps to help us understand the trends. And I think that's really fascinating. So
absolutely.
Anything else that you want to kind of convey about where you think this particular project is different and unique in that kind of approach?
Well, I think I'd go back to the model. The model has been developed over many years, tried and tested, and we know what doesn't work, and we know what works, and we know all the documentation, etc. So I think the model makes it unique, as opposed to some of the projects which we probably remember, where a website was put up and it said, "Yeah, you just send us what you've got." So I think the democratization, this is really community led, because they're the ones. Yeah, I think I agree with that as a statement. So yeah, it's the local communities. They know their local networks. They know their local media. They know how to get people. They know what care homes to go and visit. They know what schools. So that's where it is really interesting. It works quite successfully, I think. Yeah, I don't know if that's answered your question, Paul.
I think it has. Yeah. So we will wrap things up. But obviously, there's the links we've got to the little videos on the website about how people can get involved and participate and what have you. But if you want to run through a few more things, because obviously the kind of viewership we have people who work at organizations, at museums, associations, veterans groups, things like that. Yeah. Is there any other means by which some of the viewership of this can come forward and participate beyond perhaps the things you have listed on the website?
Yeah, well, there is a form on the website where you can register interest to be helpful. So I think the key things are getting the word out. So anyone anywhere in the world can post this. The second message, which is really we're trying to get across, is, we are interested in the stories of the people who weren't fighting, who were on the home front, as well as the combatants. We want to capture all of that. The third thing is, that even if you don't have an object, you might have something that was passed down in terms of a story or a memory. So we're very interested in capturing that, and memorialization as well. People do come in with objects, and then when you dig into it, they start telling you about almost a memorial ceremony that used to go around this at family events on the person's birthday and so on, so forth, like that. And finally, I think the one thing which we're really trying to do is show that this, for Britain at least, this was the whole Commonwealth. People from all kinds of backgrounds contributed to this war effort, if it was in North Africa, Burma, or in Britain, or in Europe, or whatever. And we're trying to capture that. So it's any networks that we can find, local, within the UK or outside of the UK, of people representing all of those other backgrounds and nationalities who contributed to that, to try and capture their story. That's really important as well.
So in a sense, you're even interested in people like myself who might go in and say, here's how my relatives talked about World War II to me when I was younger. Maybe I don't have any archives or diaries or photo, but I just remember those being at the hearth in the front room there, and great uncles and grandfathers and things telling me stuff about it, and then passing that on to you, so you can use that for some kind of database. So, well, that's exactly the demographic of people who are watching World War II TV. I mean, the people who watch that, they do have their people. So you don't have to come in with a Spitfire propeller to be acceptable as well. You can come in with just almost a loose idea of what within your family or within your community World War II meant, and that is as valuable as actually a hat.
Very, absolutely. It's the, I don't know if you've read Dan Todman's generational study for the First World War, the Great War, and how it passes down. So I don't know about like you, but I heard it all from my grandfather, who was ran a POW camp in Quorn in Leicestershire, or he worked there. I heard the stories from him, which my mother had never heard. So it skipped to generation. So, and that's really important as well. But yes, absolutely, those sorts of tales that are passed down.
Well, I think that's where we will leave it. And I think that's where, for me, that was the kind of revelation bit when I was reading your email, looking at the website, is it's not just, I'm repeating myself, it's not just about the framed photo of the medals taken. It's about the way the war has been memorialized by families, remembered, how people have considered it, and how that is changing and evolving. Because I say we're in a position now where it is thought of in one way, and And I think there's a lot of people there who've got a bit of not war fatigue, but as you said earlier, the fact that we can't go through a day without someone being compared to the Nazis, or someone you referring to Blitzspirit or Churchill or whatever it is. Peter Hitchens this week is all about so Hitler was a socialist and all that kind of stuff. Is that we've got a little bit fatigued by that use of it, but actually there's this collective understanding of World War II that's useful, and we can learn from it, and not just ourselves now, but say in the future generations that how did we think about it in 2023? So brilliant. So people are remarking I haven't said the word rabbit hole. I will say rabbit hole so you can all have a drink now, because that don't know Stuart is the code. They can have a drink. But it's been brilliant talking to you. So as I say, all the links in the description below, and maybe we can have you on and some of the members of the team on perhaps in a year's time to give us an update on where you are with the project, and maybe it'll have evolved and gone a slightly different direction than you weren't anticipating. That would be really extraordinary.
We'd love to, and thank you very much, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So folks, we're back again tomorrow with a show about the Long Range Desert Group, which will be fantastic. But right now, I'm thanking Dr. Steve for joining us, and thanking you all for your brilliant questions. This is Paul Woodhouse for World War II TV saying cheers. Bye.